principal hired him because he was cheap and available. The teachers ignored him because he was quiet. The students mocked him because he seemed harmless. What none of them knew was that the man in the faded security uniform had once been the kind of soldier who walked into hell to bring people home. Welcome to Stories of Secret Hero. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden courage and forgotten valor, tell me in the comments, from which city are you watching today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those who never stopped protecting others. The job posting had been up for 6 weeks. Minimum wage, maximum responsibility. Watch the doors, check IDs, break up fights between teenagers who thought detention was the worst thing that could happen to them. Most applicants took one look at the chaos of Roosevelt High and walked away. Then Frank Morrison showed up. He was 62, gray-haired, with reading glasses that hung from a chain around his neck. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, his voice quiet but clear. When Principal Davies asked about his qualifications, Frank simply said he'd worked security before and could start immediately. No background in education, no fancy certifications, just an old man who needed work and wasn't afraid of teenagers. Davies hired him on the spot. Frank started the following Monday. He wore the same thing every day. A navy blue security uniform that was too big in the shoulders, black sneakers that squeaked on the linoleum, and a radio that crackled with static. He stationed himself by the main entrance every morning at 7 sharp, checking student IDs with the same methodical patience he used for everything else. The kids noticed him immediately. Not because he was intimidating, he wasn't. Not because he was strict, he rarely spoke. They noticed him because he was easy to ignore, and teenagers have a talent for spotting authority figures they don't need to fear. "Morning, Mr. Morrison," some would mumble as they rushed past. Others weren't so polite. "Yo, security squad," one junior called out, making his friends laugh. "You gonna chase me if I run?" Frank would just nod politely and wave them through. The teachers weren't much better. They'd smile and say hello, but their eyes would already be looking past him toward their classrooms, their lesson plans, their real responsibilities. Frank Morrison was furniture, necessary but forgettable. Ms. Chen, the vice principal, felt sorry for him. He seemed lonely, standing by those doors all day with nothing but his thermos of black coffee and a paperback novel he never seemed to have time to read. She tried making conversation once. "How are you settling in, Frank?" "Fine, ma'am, just fine. You know, if you ever want to join us for lunch in the teacher's lounge, that's kind of you, but I'm good here." He was always good there, always at his post, always watching, always quiet. What none of them saw was how Frank watched, not like a tired old man counting hours until retirement, but like someone cataloging detail. He knew which students looked tired because they worked night jobs to help their families. He knew which ones came to school angry because their parents were fighting. He noticed the quiet kids who ate lunch alone and the popular ones whose smiles didn't reach their eyes. He knew that Jeremy Walsh, the star quarterback, had started flinching when people raised their voices. He'd seen Sarah Martinez hiding bruises under long sleeves, even in the spring heat. He'd noticed that Marcus Thompson, the class clown, always made his jokes louder on the days his mother forgot to pack his lunch. Frank Morrison saw everything. He just didn't say anything about it. Until the morning, everything changed. It was a Tuesday in October. The leaves were turning, the morning air was crisp, and Roosevelt High was settling into its usual rhythm. Frank was at his post by 7, coffee still steaming in his thermos, watching students stream through the metal detectors with the same sleepy indifference they'd shown for months. That's when he saw him. The man was in his mid-20s, athletic build, wearing a dark jacket despite the mild weather. He walked with purpose but kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with the cameras positioned above the entrance. His right hand stayed buried in his jacket pocket, gripping something Frank couldn't see but could definitely recognize. The stranger approached the main desk where student volunteers checked IDs. Frank stepped forward, his movement casual but deliberate. "Good morning," Frank said, his voice carrying just enough authority to stop the man mid-step. "You'll need to check in at the office if you're visiting." The man looked up for the first time, and Frank saw eyes that were too bright, too focused, the kind of eyes that belonged to someone riding an adrenaline wave toward a decision they couldn't take back. "I'm here to see someone," the man said, his voice tight. "Who would that be?" "It doesn't matter." That's when Frank knew. He'd seen that look before, in places where young men learned that death was always closer than they thought. He'd recognized the body language, the coiled tension, the hypervigilance, the way the stranger's free hand kept checking his pockets like he was running through a mental checklist. Frank Morrison, The quiet old man who squeaked when he walked stepped directly into the stranger's path. "Sir, I'm going to need you to stop right there." The man's eyes narrowed. "Move. Can't do that. You don't understand. I have business here." Frank nodded slowly. "I understand better than you think, but these kids don't deserve to be part of your business." For a moment, they stared at each other. The stranger was younger, stronger, and carrying something that could end lives in seconds. Frank was just an old security guard with squeaky shoes and reading glasses. But Frank wasn't thinking about what he lacked. He was thinking about room-to-room clearing in Fallujah, about IED sweeps in Kandahar, about all the times he'd stood between danger and people who couldn't protect themselves. The stranger reached for his pocket. Frank moved. What happened next took less than 10 seconds, but everyone who witnessed it would remember it for the rest of their lives. Frank Morrison, the man they'd ignored, mocked, and forgotten, moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd spent decades turning violence into protection. He didn't tackle the stranger. He didn't throw wild punches. He simply did what he'd been trained to do 20 years earlier in a different uniform, on a different continent, when protecting people was his only job. The disarm was textbook. The takedown was controlled. The suspect restraint was professional. By the time Principal Davies came running from his office, Frank was calmly sitting on the subdued intruder, speaking into his radio with the same quiet voice he used to check student IDs. "This is Morrison. We need police and paramedics at the main entrance. Situation contained." The weapon, a semi-automatic pistol with a full magazine, lay safely on the floor 3 feet away, exactly where Frank had placed it after removing it from the stranger's grip. It wasn't until the police arrived that anyone thought to ask the obvious question: how did a 62-year-old security guard with squeaky shoes manage to stop an armed intruder without anyone getting hurt? The answer came when Officer Martinez, a veteran herself, noticed the way Frank moved, the way he positioned himself, the way he communicated with authorities. She pulled him aside after the suspect was loaded into the police car. "What unit?" she asked quietly. Frank looked at her for a long moment. 3rd Infantry. 2 tours Iraq, 1 Afghanistan. Rank? Sergeant First Class. Officer Martinez nodded. "How long you been out?" 8 years. "And you've been working school security?" Frank shrugged. "Someone's got to watch the kids." Word spread quickly through Roosevelt High. Not the official story. That would come later, sanitized and approved by the district office. The real story passed from student to student, teacher to teacher, like wildfire through dry grass. Frank Morrison wasn't just a security guard. He was a combat veteran who'd served 3 tours in the Middle East. The man they'd been ignoring had walked through places that existed in their nightmares, and he'd chosen to spend his retirement protecting them. The mockery stopped immediately. The jokes died in throats that suddenly understood the difference between harmless and gentle, between weak and patient. Jeremy Walsh, the quarterback who'd called him security squad for months, approached Frank's station the next morning with tears in his eyes. "Mr. Morrison," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry." Frank looked up from his paperwork, the same calm expression he'd always worn. "For what, son?" For not seeing." Frank stood up, all 6 feet of him unfolding with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin. "Jeremy, you know what I see when I look at you?" The boy shook his head. "I see someone who leads by example, someone his teammates look up to, someone who's going to make something good of his life." Frank paused. "That's all I've ever seen." Jeremy nodded, not trusting his voice. "Now get to class. First period starts in 5 minutes, and Mr. Henderson gets cranky when his star player shows up late." As Jeremy walked away, Frank called after him. "And Jeremy, keep being yourself. The world needs more good kids, not fewer." The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was real. Students started making eye contact when they walked past Frank's station. Teachers stopped looking through him like he was part of the furniture. Principal Davies, who'd hired him because he was cheap and available, began to understand that some bargains are actually treasures in disguise. Sarah Martinez, the girl with the hidden bruises, started lingering by Frank's desk in the mornings. She never said much, just stood nearby while he checked IDs, as if his presence made the school feel safer. Marcus Thompson, the class clown, stopped by one afternoon and quietly asked, "Mr. Morrison, you ever scared?" Frank considered the question seriously. "Every day, son. But you do it anyway? That's what courage is, Marcus. Not the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done even when you're scared." Marcus nodded and walked away, but he came back the next day with the same question phrased differently, and the day after that with another variation. Frank answered them all with the same patient attention he'd once given to intelligence briefings in war zones. One morning, a month after the incident, Frank arrived to find something new at his station. A small American flag in a coffee mug with a handwritten note that simply said, "Thank you for your service. The students of Roosevelt High." He never found out who left it, but he kept it on his desk for the rest of the school year. Frank Morrison never talked about what happened that day. When reporters called, he declined interviews. When the district office wanted to give him a commendation, he politely refused. When students asked about his military service, he'd answer their questions, but never volunteered details. He was still the same quiet man who squeaked when he walked, still brought the same thermos of black coffee, still read the same paperback novels during his breaks. But now when students rushed past him in the mornings, they slowed down just a little. When teachers said hello, they meant it. When parents dropped their kids off, they nodded respectfully to the man by the metal detectors, because now they knew what Frank Morrison had always known. The best protection often comes from the most unexpected places, and the greatest heroes are usually the ones who never wanted to be heroes at all. He'd walked through hell to bring people home, and now he stood guard at Roosevelt High, making sure they had a safe place to grow up. Some men serve their country in uniform, then spend their retirement protecting the next generation in ways no one notices until it matters most. Frank Morrison was both. The quiet guardian who asked for nothing except the chance to keep watching the door, making sure the people inside could focus on becoming everything they were meant to be. So I ask you, have you ever met someone like Frank Morrison? Someone who served without seeking recognition, who protected without asking for praise? Share their name in the comments. Tell us their story. Because here at Stories of Secret Heroes, we believe the greatest courage often wears the most humble uniforms. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to remember that heroes come in all forms. We'll see you in the next story, and until then, remember, the person you walk past every day might be the one willing to risk everything to keep you safe. Welcome to Stories of Secret Heroes, where the quiet ones speak the loudest.